Okay, so it's time of the month for me to show my ugly mug again. I like what this says. If you haven't found something strange during the day, it hasn't been much of a day. Definitely true. Okay, so I don't think I want to do it this way for any more videos because it's just hard to remember what I've read like a month ago. So here we go. I'll try and remember. I've written stuff down, so it should be fine. Right. So the first one I read was The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I didn't think it lived up to the hype. People say it's amazing, beautiful, whatever, you know, depressing. I didn't even find it particularly depressing, so it was a disappointment all round. One particular thing that I didn't like was that women got pregnant to eat the baby, but when you think about it, this doesn't make sense because you have to put in as much energy as you'll get out, so it's not a good way of producing food, really. Oh yeah, one thing that I think was the main theme in the book was that the man always referred to himself and his son as the good guys, and like everyone else is the bad guy. Basically, the people who resort to cannibalism are the bad guys. So it's kind of necessary for people to think of themselves as the protagonist of their own life, really. They can't see themselves as an evil character, even though the guy always does some questionable things. It's the son who always persuades him to do something good, you know. But I found the ending really disappointing. Well, I won't spoil it if you're going to read it, but you'll know what I'm talking about. You know, it wasn't depressing enough for me. Unless they were actually the bad guys. Yeah. But I think that's all I have to say for that. Okay, so another thing I read was Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. Well, the writing's good. I like how he writes. Quite humorous at parts. Fairly simple to understand. I mean, I think I've read a bit of his stuff before, but I was around 2 years younger and I didn't get it fully. And then I tried to read this again and then it just made sense. Right. Oh yeah. A lot of what I gained from the book wasn't what Nietzsche himself wrote, more from kind of insights that he triggered. He's good at presenting his opinions. He doesn't really argue in the traditional sense, he just kind of says what he thinks, which I didn't really like, but there you go. There's a lot of yeah, he does justify this approach kind of at the start, saying that people don't really seek truth anyway, they just kind of seek the feeling that something they think is right. It ties in with a lot of psychology that I've been reading, actually. People kind of seek order in things, and that's why people create stuff. But anyway, that's like completely different, so I'll stop talking about that now. Okay, so next thing is Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. Well, and a few other people, but can't remember what they're called. I found it very interesting. Lots of new ideas for me. Stuff about dream interpretation, rituals and religion, and it definitely explains a lot about religion. It'd be really interesting to study that kind of thing with this knowledge, so I would recommend it. So another thing I read was Malignant Sadness. It's more scientific than I expected. I expected something kind of poetic even, you know. you know, the kind of thing, somewhat depressing. But it looks at the physical aspects, you know, all the chemicals, and how it's kind of, well, what its symptoms are in different places, and somatization, and the kind of not immediately physical aspects. One thing I found interesting was that apparently psychotherapy is equally as effective as drugs in treating depression, and the different kinds of psychotherapy are very similar in their effectiveness, which really makes sense when you think about it, because after all, nothing is just psychological. Everything's connected to your physical brain. So in thinking differently, you're obviously using the neurons differently, different neurotransmitters are going around, so it does really make sense. It's making the same kind of chemical change as the drugs are. What else? Okay, so I'll move on to the next book, The Dynamics of Creation by Anthony Storr. He kind of, well, I wouldn't say he draws heavily on Freud, but he kind of argues against him a lot. I haven't read any Freud, so I don't have an opinion, but this guy seemed to think that he overlooked a lot. He was trying to kind of present creativity as adaptive rather than neurotic, because neuroses kind of, well, they're maladaptive, obviously. They're reacting to some psychological complex or difficulty in a maladaptive way, whereas creativity is responding in an adaptive way because it does help to solve these problems, whereas neurosis is just kind of a distraction. It does kind of go on about wish fulfillment a bit, talking about James Bond, things like that. You know, they're obviously is wish fulfillment, really. Especially going on Ian Fleming's life. He does go into a bit of detail about that. He talks about Newton, Einstein, like different kinds of creativity. Okay. One of the reasons he says that art is adaptive is that it kind of gives us greater understanding of how we perceive things. So even if it's not figurative, we can still like learn new things about how shapes alter how we see things and different colours and that kind of thing. And music kind of represents the resolution of inner conflict, because there's, you know, it kind of builds up to a certain bit and then it goes to the tonic and then you're like, oh yes, good. You know, all the different chord progressions and that kind of symbolises your emotions. But it doesn't symbolise them, but you know what I mean. Another one was the Great Gatsby. Now, I wasn't expecting to enjoy this, but I really did. I really like how he writes. And it's kind of message, I suppose, at least what I got from it. I'm not sure if this is right at all, but Gatsby's dream of true love was kind of unrealistic, but his massive accumulation of wealth was realistic. So it's kind of comment on the materialism and, you know, money can't buy happiness, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's quite significant that nobody goes to his funeral, even though he's held all these massive parties, and apart from the drunk guy in the library. So I think, yeah. Well, I'm also in the middle of two. I've been reading Iliad for ages because I don't like it, and I'm reading information, and I will do individual book reviews from now on because I think that's just the way to go. Right, see ya.